Absolutely Talks, empowering talent for global careers. Brought to you by Absolutely French, presented by Armel Pervin.
Hello everyone, and welcome to this new episode of Absolutely Talks. So we are really happy today to have Olivier Meier with us live today. So it's a live, so feel free to drop your questions in the chat directly if you have any time, and we will make sure to bring them in during the talk. Today's topic is one that's checking up global mobility everywhere, from cash to care, from policy to purpose. And let me start with a story. Last week, a global mobility manager told me something that really stuck. 95% of the cash, so it's what he said, we give to assignees, partners, is used to buy an object, a sofa, a car, something visible, but almost never to fund integration or training. And of course, it made me think, does that object make them happier, maybe for a while, but does it help the family feel at home, build a network, or stay longer on assignment? Not really. So according to Mercer's 2025 Global Mobility Survey, 1 in 3 international assignments still ends earlier than planned. And the main reason is not cost, it's family adjustment. So when we talk about shifting from cash to care, it's not a slogan or something. It's really a survival strategy. So for those joining for the first time, I'm Armel Perben, founder of Absolutely French. We help companies integrate their expats and expat partners in France through language, culture, and community. Because I really believe integration is the first step toward a successful expatriation, and integration is not only learning the language, it's also making connection, meeting people, understanding the city where you live. And it's very important for the partner, for the expat also, and for the company. So Absolutely Talks was born from the same vision to bring together experts, HR, and mobility professionals from around the world to explore what truly drives successful international mobility. So thank you, Olivier, to be here. So just to introduce Olivier, is Mercer's global mobility expert, advising companies worldwide on strategy, talent trends, and also the role of AI and impact measurement in the future of mobility. So, Olivier, could you please introduce yourself a little bit more?
Thank you, Ahmed. It's a pleasure to be with you today. So essentially, I spent most of my career, the past 25 years, in mobility. It started, again, 25 years ago in Geneva. At that time, it was very much, the expatriate management in a traditional sense, so how we build a package. I was looking after cost of living, housing cost, and these type of issues. And over the years, it evolved into many different things. The more complex form of talent mobility, which is about the expatriate, but also other categories, and many other topics, related to talent management, to use of technologies. Obviously, if I advise on mobility, I had to test it myself. So I've been an expatriate on long-term assignments, short-term assignments, localized, working virtually for other countries as well. 25 years after, I'm now based in Munich, still looking after the talent mobility issues at Mercer, trying to explore new trends and new solutions. So I wanted to share with you today. I think we are going to discuss about some of the hot topics for global mobility now.
Yes. So if you had to describe the biggest change in global mobility over the past few years, what would it be?
Well, the biggest change is about the scope. Again, when we thought about mobility, it was really this definition of expatriate on a very rich package, moving from country A to country B, and it was all about the relocation. And now we see it's much more complex than that. And there were a number of changes in the past few years. Change has been accelerating. Biggest change would be probably about the use of international remote working, something that maybe we did not anticipate 10 years ago, but has become really widespread. So it could be temporary international remote working for, let's say, 20 days per year. It could be something more permanent. The person is not willing to move. It's very much about moving the job to the people as opposed to the people to the job. And beyond that, there is also all kind of different cross-border moves. So it might be self-requested move, people who are willing to market themselves globally or directly in the country already. So say to determine what kind of package we can offer. There are more and more permanent move, not permanent in the sense that people are going to spend their life in the country, but permanent in the sense that there is no link with the home country. They are not an expatriate package, they are localized, but localized in different way, pure local, local plus, different forms of arrangements. And then many situations of cross-border working could be simple commuters or more complex arrangements. And this has forced really global mobility team and HR to rethink about what is mobility. I mean, rethink for themselves, what is my responsibility? Am I sticking to the international assignments or am I getting involved in the other topics? And then for companies using more and more these new forms of mobility to see how they can hire from everywhere. And also for the people, I mean, working from everywhere. Now, in reality, we know it cannot be totally everywhere in every circumstances. But this idea is much more fluid than it was 20 years ago. I mean, it's much more complex. If you cannot be an expatriate, could it be locally hired foreigners? Could it be a commuter? Could it be virtual workers? There are many more options. And I think now the role of mobility is to really select between these different options.
Yes, thank you. Very interesting to have your point of view on this subject. We often hear about the shift from cash to care in mobility policies. So, do you think it's a global trend or something that depends on the company's culture and employer brand?
I think it depends very much on the context. What we call cash, actually, it will be a form of lump sum. So it will be about either providing an amount, a budget, 5,000, 10,000 euros that the people can use themselves. Sometimes it's about cashing out. So you have some benefit options, but you prefer to take the cash. And this is a very common practice in general. If we look at all forms of lump sums, between 50 and 60% of companies would offer it. The issue is we have to look at the details. There are some scenarios where it work better, other scenarios where it work less. And that's a little bit in this context that we discuss about care, saying, okay, there might be scenarios where it does make sense to provide the benefits in kind. It does make sense to provide more support. And again, the key issue is to determine a little bit of scenarios. So it's not linked to general trends or a specific industry. It's more that companies need more tools and they need to understand when to use the different tools.
Yes, and can you share maybe an example where a care approach really made a difference for the assignee or for the partner?
Well, typically it would be, I would say, for people either we've got more responsibility, so someone moving with a spouse and family, and children. So in that case, you need more support. You need to organize, the move of the entire family. So it's not just about paying an amount, it's about showing the support. It's also more beneficial for first-time move, people who doesn't have an experience, an international experience. So these people is more interesting to provide some real support, more visible support. And again, they might not have all the information to decide by themselves what they do with their budget. If you just give an amount, some will make the right choices, others will not make the right choices because a lot of problems throughout the assignments. So this group, as soon as you talk about people new to expatriation, families, moving with a spouse, it's really beneficial to provide the real benefits. If you're dealing with more experienced people or even singles moving, sometimes in some industry, I'm thinking about an engineer in the oil and gas industry, they go for project for 2 years. They are used to do that. They have been going from project to project. They might not be staying long with the company. It's more about the cash. And I think that's totally okay in this type of scenario to understand that people are moving because there is an attractive project where they can save for their future. So they want the cash. So it's very much about being able to have this kind of thinking and say, okay, might be about the industry, but it's also about my company, different groups. What is appropriate with the different groups? And that's important because, we do a lot of benchmarking. So I give you the figures at 60% reporting using a lump sum. Doesn't say much. For who are you using the lump sum? Does it really make sense? It's all about the context and understanding the difference between the two.
Yeah, and you said that for the first expatriation, they will take the care usually, but for me, we have since we welcome a lot of expats. What we saw is that if it's the first expatriation, they don't understand what they need. They don't know because it's the first expatriation.
There's a lot of education to be done. I mean, especially if you're dealing with young people. They may take the cash because, I mean, it's the obvious thing to do because they believe they're more flexible. Doesn't mean it's always the right choice. I mean, it's a case for the support, in-depth support. It's the same thing with things like retirement. I mean, how do you explain retirement to someone who is 25? I mean, it's very abstract, all these kind of things. The problem is after 20 years, they will start thinking about it and say, look, I got a problem. They turn to the company and say, why didn't you support me? You did not contribute to this and that, and I'm in trouble. So there is a lot of education to be done. Again, understanding the expectation of the groups. It might okay if someone say, I want cash to give cash, but understanding the context. We need also to remember that it's not fixed. I mean, we say there are different groups with different expectations, but even within a group, you might have changing expectations. We have seen that 3 or 4 years ago when there was higher inflation, for example. People were retreating to cash, to the basics. Why? Because the families were struggling a little bit more financially, especially some nationalities, and a bit less in Europe, but in other countries. So it did make sense at that time, actually, to focus on the cash. They needed more cash, simply. And then, of course, now the situation is a bit better. They might be more willing to look at the other things, and the lifestyle, and the support, the actual support that can be provided on assignments. So it's important to monitor that, understand a different group, understand that the expectation might be changing, and try to find what's the best in a given situations, and not in general just following the buzz.
And so if you had one extra euro to spend in an expat package, where would you put it to create the biggest impact?
I would actually resist, I mean, jumping on something. That's a little bit about this buzz that we are hearing. I'm always wary when we see, I mean, say, we have heard that we need to do that, so let's do it, and let's invest in this. It depends. And there will be a challenge more and more about the role of mobility, what we are supposed to do, where the added value, especially in the context of AI in the future, automatization. The added value is about understanding this context and push back a little bit and say, look, you're telling me I got more budgets. Okay, let's see what are the real needs. Do we understand our population? Who needs really what really makes sense? What is equitable? And then we can decide on that. And that's where we make a difference. Because if it's automatic, if you say, look at the benchmarking, 60% said lump sum, and I got the budget, everything can be automatized. I mean, we don't need to be there. I think the mobility managers is very much about having this discussion, push back and say, look, we got these people, it's a family, they got some special requirement. Did we ask actually what the spouse is doing? I mean, do we understand the situation? And if we understand, okay, maybe we can do something in this direction. So that's the kind of discussion we can have. And that's where we add the most value, I think, to the organization.
Yeah, and it's always difficult to decide what they need because, it really depends on the situation. So the personalization is also
Yeah.
complicated. It costs a lot.
And I think it's not about creating 20 policies. When we hear about personalization, segmentation, sometimes we overdo it. It's just think to say, okay, what's going to be the impact? If I invest this €1 for the different groups, is it going to affect their satisfaction? Is it objectively going to support them or not? After that, it doesn't mean you have to create separate policies. You still stick to the same budgets, but maybe you present it in a different way. Maybe you do more education, communication, and that's how you can actually differentiate. It's not about changing the policies necessarily or changing the budget, but the way it's presented has to be different.
Okay. So you mentioned when we had our talk before that mobility patterns are changing and more local contracts, more permanent transfers, more rework. How is this impacting mobility strategies today?
We're actually taking it from a different angle. If we are just think as mobility as relocation, of course, it's just an administrative task. It's fairly simple. We move from A to B. The decision has already been taken by general management. Now, if we think it as a way to source talent and to retain and attract talent, it's a bit different. There, we are much more aligned with the company strategy. So we go back to what we said. I mean, the company needs to find skills. So where are these skills? They are in a given country. So how do we get the talent there? Do we have to move someone? Do we have to hire someone locally? Can we have someone work remotely from another locations? And we go back to this idea about providing options to the business, because that's what the business needs at the moment. So it's very much linked to talent sourcing, even talent brokering, which is to connect the talent with the jobs. And how do we do that? We need to understand the implication in terms of cost, in terms of contract, in terms of what's feasible. And that's where HR again can add value to the business.
You said people are mobile, but not everywhere. How does companies adapt when talents refuse certain destinations?
That's an interesting trend because I remember about 10 years ago, we had this impression saying young people are very mobile and that's great and we don't need to pay as much for packages. They are very mobile to trendy cities. Of course, they want to enjoy the lifestyle. They want to go to the main hubs where there is something happening. They don't want to go to where the company need to send them, especially if it's a remote location or a smaller city or a country that is less attractive. So again, that's why I'm saying we need to present options because it's not going to be a match systematically. It
Mm-mm.
might be about paying more money, but it's not about all about money. It's about the family situations, about the personal preferences of young people. So you need to provide options and say, in this case, what can we do? Do we convince a person to move? So is it about more support? Talking about family support, we say, well, actually, maybe you're reluctant to move because the spouse cannot work. So we are going to provide some support so that actually your spouse can work in the host locations. If it doesn't work, can we do something else? Is it a commuting arrangement? Can be stressful for the individual. Could it be international remote work? So I think there are more options now. And again, it's very much about giving some visibility to these tools and also being able to explain the implication of this, implication in terms of cost and how we do it in practice. And sometimes it's not obvious.
So we are going to speak about remote work, about especially for expat partners. So it looks simple on paper, but it's not. What are the real risks companies face when a partner works remotely?
So if the partner does find a job, then of course the risk would be for that company. Because the temptation might be to say, okay, I cannot be in the right location, but it's okay, I'm going to work remotely. Then there is a series of risks. You start with the basics. I mean, do you have the right immigration visa? Do you have the right to work? What about the social security arrangements? What about insurance to make sure you're covered for everything? It's not obvious as well. And then the question related to tax, and that's where it can also be tricky for the person, also for the organization employing this person. It will be about personal liabilities. Sometimes we hear about this idea that if it's not 180 days per year, we are safe. It's not the case. It depends on the country. Some countries, in some situations, they can start as of day one, especially if there is a previous history where this person has been in that country. So there is a problem in terms of personal liability. And there can be more serious risk for companies, something called permanent establishments. If you got someone in the country where you don't have any entity, and this person is signing contract and conducting business on a regular basis, but the authorities might say, actually, we consider you got an office. It's the equivalent of an office. And then suddenly it's huge tax liability for the company. So in practice, it's very unlikely. It might be 1% chance, but when it hits, it's actually a huge issue. So that's why you need to really take into consideration all the different scenarios. And also when you're relocating a family, maybe you need to understand, okay, this is impacting the dynamic. So I know my employee is supposed to be in that country, but the spouse of this employee actually maybe needs to be somewhere else. So are they going to travel between the countries, commute? And at some point, my employee can be working from the wrong country. So you need to understand a little bit this implication to make sure you're not ending up in a situation that would cost for the employee and for the company as well.
Yeah, because we really have more and more expat partners in Absolutely French who work remotely, and I think they don't know that, and I'm not sure that the company also knows it. So
Idea that we don't want people to do things under the radar. So it could be okay. Actually, there are many scenarios when it works, but it needs to be reported. It needs to be analyzed a little bit, and we need to understand where people are. Otherwise, we might end up with huge problems.
So, what would you recommend as basic rules or best practices for companies in this situation? What should they do?
But typically, you do have policy now more and more for international remote work. I've seen, at least for the temporary international remote work, I see about two-thirds of companies having formal policies on this. And typically, they will put some restrictions. So restriction on duration, saying average is 25 to 30 days per year. They will put some restriction in terms of countries. It might be country where it's too complicated, there's too much risk. It might be the countries where the company doesn't have operation because of the risk of permanent establishment I mentioned before. And then there might be some risk linked to the position. So either practical things, might be internet security, data security, or simply because the person is too important, the general manager or someone signing contract, and they are the one who trigger the most liabilities, especially for permanent establishments. So usually you do have a policy that allows something. So it's not work from everywhere, it's work from some locations for a limited duration with some additional restrictions.
And when we prepared this talk, you told me something that I loved, that companies should always offer a meeting with a partner, even if it's optional.
Yeah.
Why do you think this meeting matters so much?
But we know that the main issues very often are not the one that HR is going to talk to. I mean, it's related to the family, to spouse, maybe parents as well. So all kind of things that the company doesn't know, but things that actually can really cause a problem during the assignments. So there is something about privacy. You cannot force people to, I mean, invite the spouse or tell the company about their family, but you want to create an environment where they have a possibility before the assignment to raise all the questions and concerns. So
Mm.
inviting them to a meeting, reassuring them they can ask any questions, especially concerns. I mean, they should not have the impression that if I say something, I might lose a job or not be considered as candidates. It has to be a safe environment so you get as much information from the employees about the situation, and also do a little bit of brainstorming. I mean, people might not think about things and then realize on assignment that suddenly, okay, there is an issue. Actually, my spouse cannot work. And what about my elderly parents? I need to go more frequently back to the home country. So all these kinds of questions should be better addressed before the assignment and during the assignment. So anything that goes in that direction about this transparency and this open discussion is very positive.
Is there a topic that they should ask, something that they can't forget when they miss the partner?
I think it's very much, I mean, asking the requirement of the family. So
Oui. Mm.
the spouse, the children, making sure the school system and everything is okay. And additional things. Are there other things we forgot to mention? Again, the extended family. There'll be elderly parents. There's more and more people now. We've got elderly parents, and they're going to be 5,000 kilometers away. This could be an issue. From some nationality, there is even a responsibility. So for them, it's extremely important. So we need to raise a little bit these issues and try to see if we can have a discussion. And if the person doesn't want to share, it's fine. But it should be a welcoming environment where we say, please express all your concern, because most of the time you can find a solution. But if you don't talk about it, then it's going to appear during the assignments and create problems.
Mm. And it's also because I've been an expat partner in 7 countries, so I really understand this. And for me, it was also important to feel part of a project, not only my husband. So I think there is something that to put the partner involved in this project, I think it's so important. It's not only the legal points and all of that. It's really if you involve the spouse, then you have help from the spouse.
I think you're right. I mean, it's very good to have this and say, look, we are moving a family. We're not moving one individual. And in a way, we got some kind of duty of care for the whole family. I mean, we are creating new situations for these people. And if something happens, it's normal that they turn to the company and say, look, you asked me to move, and now I need support from my family. So you're absolutely right. I mean, it's about moving more than one person.
So let's speak about AI now. So AI is moving fast in HR and mobility is next, I think. So where do you see AI creating the most value today in mobility?
Well, first of all, it's a beginning for mobility. It means it hasn't really started. I mean, people are experimenting with tools. We see a little bit chatbots appearing to answer some questions about the policy, attempt to automatize some of the basic processes.
Mm.
But compared to other part of HR is going a bit slowly. It's interesting to see that the part of HR that are moving the fastest are not the most basic ones. It's about recruitment, performance evaluation. You got more and more AI analyzing this, which is quite interesting because it tells us that actually AI is not replacing the most simple basic task. It's also about doing something complex if it's repetitive. So we see a lot about recruitment performance, more and more into reward now, especially because there are some requirements about pay equity and pay transparency. So AI is helping a little bit to analyze all of this. And I think it's going to come to mobility in different ways. It is starting already by using generic tools like ChatGPT. So day-to-day activities, I mean, people will check a little bit their policy, the text, what they are preparing using the generic tools. They need to be aware of what they can do and cannot do. What they cannot do, obviously, is put some private information into generic tools that are not safeguarded and
Right.
protected in the company. But that's one way to start building from the bottom, really try to make sure that people are more familiar with this because it will come. It will be a day-to-day required skills. Then it's coming from the other part of HR, like we said. Mobility is also involved in discussion with talent management and recruitment. So they will be linked to some AI tools and they will have to find ways to link their own mobility tools with AI solutions. And then the mobility tools are getting progressively upgraded, especially for the processes, the checks, like immigration, for example, checking some of the calculation for the package. This is coming also more and more. But it's still very early days. So I think it's both exciting and a little bit confusing because a lot of teams don't know where to start. But there is an opportunity to do more and to position also the people on something more interesting, not the admin task, but maybe the added value that I mentioned before.
How can HR teams keep the human touch while using more data and automation?
It's a real question. And I'm concerned if it's sometimes a little bit too simplistic. Either we say that AI can do everything or AI can do nothing because a human is automatically better for human interaction. And it's a bit more complex. We always see some chatbots. Chatbots in the past were something horrible, you never getting your answers. Nowadays, it's completely different. So there is a real reflection to say what kind of interaction do we want with our people? So interaction at a different stage of the expatriation. So from the beginning to the end. Should it be a human being? Should it be a chatbot, an AI? And again, it depends on the scenario. Sometimes you need a very quick answer, a very deep answer about complex subject, and maybe AI can retrieve that 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, and it's very good. Other
Yeah.
times you want to discuss, negotiate with your human being to really understand the context. But now I would say there is something we need to bear in mind that currently many HR teams have got a lot of work to do. They're not necessarily involved in all this human interaction. So maybe there is some thinking about what do we want to achieve with this, and maybe retrain ourselves, having a training to say, okay, if we have to deal with people, what do we need to understand? Some of the assignees might want to negotiate. Are we trained for this kind of negotiation, or is it going to be a surprise? They
Mm.
might be complaining about something. So how do you handle complaints? They need some support. Are we fully trained to provide that support? So there is something that needs to be done to really this thinking. Where do we add value? And we need to train ourselves to think a little bit. We want to provide, a very good human-centric experience, but what does it mean in practice? I don't think it's come automatically. It's an opportunity, but it comes only if we are prepared for it, if we train and we think about it.
Yeah, of course, we use AI in Absolutely French, and I've seen that I have more time for human now because I use less time to do the administrative part of my job. So I think there is also this thing. You will save time to have more time with the people, no? What do you think?
Having more time with the people, and the question is, what do you do with this time?
Yeah.
And I think it's worth thinking a little bit and say, okay, where do we add value? Is it just having a chit chat and say, okay, it's better to have a direct call? I think it should be more than that and say, okay, what is really supporting people? What's important for them? In our team, we might have people, again, we are not used. It might be like a client service in a way. You're in a client service, you want to deliver a very good experience, but not everyone in the HR department is ready to take a call for someone from the other side of the world who wants to complain, who's got an emergency. Are we ready for that? So that's why I was saying maybe a little bit of thinking and training, and then we can really add value to the process.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and we have with you with a baby. Huh? We can hear the baby behind
Yeah,
you.
that's about the family support. You see, it's
Exactly.
part of the
We have a
reality of work.
sound. We have a sound with a subject. It's perfect. So, what kind of training or mindset shift do you think they will need?
I think that there's two pillars essentially. One is we need to understand AI and how it can be used, not in a superficial way, but how is it producing results so we can interpret the results? How can we explain that? There will be a requirement actually to explain the decisions. So AI will probably be able to do most of the calculation and most of the research we need to do. But we are required, legally and also morally, to be able to explain, saying we have decided to apply this policy or calculate this package. This is how we've done it. So you get an imperative about transparency. So you need to understand the logic of AI, being able to use it. That's the first pillar.
Mm.
The second one is again understanding their interaction. So, like we said before, mapping when are we talking to people, what do they need at this point in time, and what's the best way to provide this support. So that's where we need to do some thinking.
Let's speak about KPI, how to have a KPI for partner support, because companies always ask for KPI. So how can we measure the impact of services provided to expat partners?
But the first thing is actually we don't see a lot of KPIs and metrics. We are talking about it, metrics, analytics, KPIs. There's not a lot of things coming actually to top management and management in general. So I think that they're right to say, look, we need a little bit more. The danger is to be too descriptive. I mean, I see a lot of dashboards saying we got 100 expatriates in China. Yes, but so what? What's the action point behind it? So we need to have, like you said, KPI is actually linking the information with some kind of objective. Now, we can do that and apply that to some benefits and support services. We need to understand a little bit, I mean, what kind of information we've got. And then there's probably two things. In the short term, it might be scenarios when someone is not moving because the spouse is not willing to move. So in that case, it's a quick win. You provide the service, and then you can calculate. You say, okay, if he was not moving, that means we need to find someone else. We have lost time. There's a cost.
Yeah. Yeah.
The person could not go at all, so in that case, we are losing revenue. So that will be in the short term the kind of scenarios we need to leverage and say, look, we have a specific case. He's not relocating to the US. What do we do? It's because actually the spouse is not moving. The family has a problem. The kids cannot go to school. Are we supporting? And if we support, we can immediately see the return on investment. Medium term, I think we have to be a bit more comprehensive. So there are ways to develop that. It could be about, for example, calculating how much it costs to lose someone, so retention. The problem we have is that in most discussions, it comes in general terms from HR. You know, it's not nice to do this person who's got a lot of expertise. No, it doesn't work. It doesn't work in a company. And you need to speak the language of the business. Explain what does it mean. It's not nice. Okay, you need to quantify. So if we want to have this kind of discussion, we probably need to quantify how much does it lose on average. If we lose someone, how much does it cost to the company? And we can make some assumptions, either because the person has a job that directly linked to revenue, like a salesperson, for example, or someone on a project. But even if we don't know, we can come up with an assumptions. If you pay someone 100,000 euros, it means it has already a certain value. So we can say, okay, the value must be at least 100,000 euros plus an uplift because the person is contributing to the company. Then it would take some time to replace this person. You might have to look for a headhunter and so on. So there might be, okay, a little bit more salary lost on that. And then the new person, we need to be trained. So if you got this, you might have the exact cost of every single signing, but you can come up with something. Scenario saying it's going to cost actually 6 months of salary of the person we are losing. And you can validate your assumptions maybe with someone from finance or management and say, well, do you agree that's the value of this person? And if we lose this person, we could say it's a 6 months of salary, so it's a huge amount. It's 50,000 euros. So that's how we start. Once we got these amounts, then we can start comparing that with the benefits of providing some support. So it will be about the cost of the support, of course, and then the difference over time. So it cannot be done immediately, but over 1-2 years, you can run a pilot and say, okay, we have been supporting this. We can see the retention is higher by 25%. Then you can put monetary value on this. So I think it's playing a little bit with the two. The one is about the anecdotes. We were stuck. We had this candidate. He's not moving. We are at risk of losing money. We managed to solve that with the support. And then the medium term is starting to put the building blocks, saying, okay, we need to calculate how much is the cost of losing someone. Let's monitor the satisfaction, the retention over 1 or 2 years. And then we can come up with something even more precise and even more valuable for the business. That's how I would start about it.
Discuss with another human HR, and he told me that there is also something with assignee's performance. That if the expat spouse is not well during the first 6 months, for example, the assignee performance is really low. And he told me that usually what they have seen is 30% less performance. So you have numbers about that? What do you think about
No,
that?
that one is difficult because you need to value the performance.
Yeah.
We remember that sometimes we don't have clear assignment goals. I mean, it seems obvious, but usually the goals are very limited. You need to complete the assignments. Okay, if there is a direct sales role or something like that, you can directly see it, but sometimes it could be about transferring skills, so it's much more difficult. So I think the trend is real. We can see the performance is impacted by family issues and say personal issues. I mean, it's clearly a big issue. But it's good if we can put a little bit of value for that. So in your example, if they calculate it on average at 30%, that's the way to do it. Not say, look, they're going to be more performance, so what? If we will say, well, we have monitored and we see actually we can see an impact on performance. It might be approximately 30%. We don't have the precise figure, but we can see there is an impact. Then the discussion becomes much more interesting. So always putting a figure, even if it's an estimate, as long as the estimate is robust, I mean, makes sense, there is a logic, you can agree with that with the manager, but always provide a figure that is valid to see what's the real impact on the business.
Another question. Do you think it's realistic to calculate a real ROI, yeah, for partner support programs?
You can calculate something. The problem with the word ROI is very often it comes like, okay, we have to have the perfect formula, calculating all the costs, and that's not how business works. We need to remember that if you talk to a manager or a finance manager, they always make estimates. I mean, logical estimates, but that's how they run the business. They make an investment, they calculate what will be the cost, what's the return that's expected. They might not have the exact figure, but they will make an assumption. So I think it's possible to make a valid assumption, to validate these assumptions again with the manager to say, look, does it make sense? We estimate that it's going to cost, I mean, that much. Does it make sense? And then we can measure the impact. So it's not a perfect return on investment, but it's an indicator of value and of costs. And again, it's much more rational than having a general discussion about the risk of losing people and unsatisfaction that does not really speak the language of the business.
I agree. So if you had to choose, what should come first for an expat partner, finding a job or integrating into the local culture?
That's a huge debate, so I don't know if we can solve this. It's quite interesting because you got the same debate in Germany about the recent immigrants. There are some countries where they prefer to have the job first, and it could work in some cases. Actually, they can integrate through the jobs. In Germany, they did the opposite. There was a lot of critics saying, okay, you have to learn the language, and it takes time, it takes months. It's difficult to judge what works in every scenarios. I mean, one is, okay, it might be quicker, so maybe for a shorter assignment, that would be my assumptions. If it's something quick, I mean, let's better integrate. Let's not spend too much time trying to learn the culture and everything. Let's go directly into the business. If it's more a permanent move, something where the family really aims to live, I mean, for a number of years in the country, then it's probably better to do the integration. So there's not one easy way. We just need to understand, is it about making sure the person can work immediately because that's important for this person? Maybe this person doesn't want a career break. That could be bad for the CV. I don't want to lose 2 years, so let's do it immediately. Or maybe it's a lifestyle move. The family is moving to that country. Maybe they will stay longer, so they need to take time to integrate, and it's more about integration.
And there is also another point. It really depends on the country, because if you go in China, I lived in China. I was not able to speak Chinese, and I was in a small town. Nobody were speaking English there. It was impossible to find a job. So before integrate. So it's also depend of the country, I think, or the city. Because if you go in Singapore, you don't need to integrate. You can find a job directly. What do you think?
That's important, especially for the retentions. We see some countries people are not going to stay because they never had the chance to integrate. They didn't spend the time learning the language. It could still work, but it means people don't stay. So that might be an issue as well. So
Yeah. And what we have seen also, we have some expat spouse coming to us after 1 year with remote work. So they were working, but they were not working in the country. So they didn't meet any people, and they needed to have a community. They wanted to meet people. So there is also this.
it's important, like you said, to understand the objective. I mean,
Yeah.
okay, work is important, but there is a social aspect. So we need to understand, is it really temporary? So, okay, it's not so important. Or are we serious about spending time in this country? And then in that case, you need also the social side of it.
Yeah. So please write your question now on LinkedIn, so I will have it before I finish to ask my last question to Olivier. So Olivier, I have another question. It's my last one. If you had to give 3 pieces of advice to global mobility leaders for 2026, one decision to make, one risk to manage, and one experiment to try, what would they be?
Well, the decision is probably about their role, thinking about what it means as mobility, what they want to take in terms of responsibilities. I think there is a real opportunities. On one side, I mean, the traditional expatriates is not growing very much. Traditional relocations, always going to be there, but it's not growing very fast. But there is a wonderful opportunity to do more, to get involved with all this question about cross-border working and even talent sourcing at an international level. So the question for them would be to say, okay, what do we want to take as responsibility? Probably expand a little bit the scope of our responsibilities. Bearing in mind, sometimes not easy because there's limit in terms of headcounts and resources. But I think it's an interesting challenge. And we also see that actually the business is coming to mobility for all kind of new issues. So even if you're not volunteering for it, I mean, the issue is going to come. I got a complex cross-border working issue. So I think it's good to be proactive and see where can we add this added value to the business by going into these new issues. And I think it's also a very interesting topic. I mean, all these kind of complex cross-border moves. So that would be probably the one action point to take. And the second you mentioned, I think it was a risk. The risk is probably not having the enough visibility. So all these people under the radar. So I would say it's wonderful to have all these people, all these new scenarios. It's actually a huge risk from a compliance perspective. So it's probably the one you have to manage, understanding where the people are, making sure they are clear about all the compliance issues. This could mean sometimes reaching out to other departments, for example, business travelers. It's normally separated from mobility, but the thing is business travelers have a tendency to extend their business travels, and how much time they spend in the country might have an impact if they do a short-term assignment, a long-term assignment, if they work virtually. So it would be very, very much about that, tracking the people where they are, understanding the implications of all the other types of move, where are the business travelers, is it impacting our responsibilities, our compliance? That's the one risk to manage at the moment.
And the last one was experiment to try.
It's probably going out of the Department of Mobility and really sits either with finance or general management to say, look, I would like to discuss a little bit about all the assumptions. And the reason for that is because mobility is always perceived, as a cost center. And management doesn't always see the value, understand all the issues. And so we say we need to be more strategic, to have a discussion. Well, it's going to happen only if you speak the language of the business and sit with these people. So the experiment would be to go to the relevant manager outside of HR and say, look, I want to discuss a little bit about our signees. I mean, how much do you think they cost? How much do you think value they bring? Can we work on some assumptions and look at some numbers? So in fact, joining a little bit this HR logic, which is very much about people, with a business logic, which is understanding a little bit the figures, because we need both sides. I mean, it's not like we can do one without the other. But I think the real experiment is to go a little bit outside of the department, outside of the comfort zone and say, look, let's sit and discuss about these assumptions, not just from a purely HR perspective, but from a business perspective as well.
Okay, so I have one question from the people. So what are the best practices observed to integrate well-being, mental health, and life balance into mobility programs?
Well, the first thing is a little bit of research before to understand the needs. Again, there might be buzz to go into specific benefits. It's important to validate that first and try to see, okay, what are they expecting, talking a little bit to people, and then monitor the adoption. That's another thing that we don't always see, that do they know what support is available? So is the communication is okay? Are they using it? If people are not using it, why? Is there a reason? I think that's a little bit what we are missing with benefits sometimes is monitoring the benefits adoption, and we will see that some of them will be very popular. Other would not be used, but they are useful, so we have an issue. We need to push for that. And finally, it might be things that we think are relevant, and maybe it's not really what they need. So there is something to structure a little bit the way we offer benefits and support, and not just assume, okay, let's give that because we know it's important, so let's just give them and they will take it. It depends, and we need to monitor that.
Okay. How do you convince leadership that investing in partner support is not a perk but a risk management strategy?
And that's what we said a little bit before. Coming back, you do need to have some building blocks for statistics. So how much does it cost to lose someone? What's the cost of delaying an assignment, of an assignment stopping prematurely? And sometimes we hesitate, especially in HR. I mean, got a lot of discussion. People say we don't have the information. But you always do have the information. You have some information. Like we said, we know how much a person is paid, for example. So that's the minimum value that the company would have. So you can start building assumptions. And again, I want to insist on this point that actually the managers, finance, and the others, they are always making assumptions. So if HR is not providing an assumption, they would say, well, we assume that actually there is little value in this service, and we assume that mobility is only a cost, and we assume maybe the value is less than what it actually is. So we need to contribute. What we need is not necessarily the perfect answer, but some assumptions that we can discuss with management. So I would really start this, even if you don't have all the data, pick one topic, one aspect of what you have, try to validate this with your manager, and try to build from that, and not wait for the perfect ROI or be
Right.
discouraged because you don't have all the information.
Okay. I have another question, but it's quite similar. So about KPI. So why is 2026 a turning point for companies managing international assignments?
Well, for companies, because they are looking for skills, I say we need to remember what's the real big business issues. It's not about relocation. It's actually they need to source skills. For a number of reasons, demographics, fewer children, fewer people entering the workforce, because people need to upskill or reskill. They might not have the real skill for AI, for example, or they are in an industry like the automotive industry where they have to switch from, all types of cars to electric cars. Is a completely different activity. So there is a lot of things about skills, finding these skills at an affordable cost. And that's a global search. And that's where actually mobility is playing a role or should be playing a role. It's really helping this talent sourcing. And then there is a question at the global mobility team level. Again, how do you adapt to this change? And there is a lot of changes. Do we take on more responsibilities, bearing in mind that we might not have more headcount? So it's not easy, but it could be interesting. There is a change coming with AI that's going very fast, even if we don't sometimes feel it. We got the impression it's okay, it's accelerating. So it's a time of change, time of opportunity, but it needs when we need to be active and say, this is what we want, this is the value we produce, and we need to understand what kind of training we need.
Okay. Thank you, Olivier. Thank you. I think it's time to stop, so I will not take any more question. So that was a very insightful conversation. Thank you so much for all the tips you gave to the HR who were listening to us. Thank you for sharing your vision and your experience with us. So I have just two things to tell before we leave. We have an event on the 21st November at L'Oréal for the Forum for Expatriate Management, Paris chapter, and we will explore together how L'Oréal supports its expat partners with Absolutely French and to help them integrate, build confidence, and find a job in France. And it's also for them, they really use this service to welcome assignees in Paris. So it's also interesting to see how they do it. So this is the first one. And then on the 5th December at 1 p.m., we have a next Absolutely Talks live on LinkedIn with Caroline Troyard. She's the voice behind the podcast I Love Mobility. So I'm happy to welcome her and speak about her experience with all the human resources people that she welcomed since she started like 3 years ago, this podcast, I think. So it will be very interesting too. Thank you again, Olivier, and thank you all for being part of this talk today with us. Take care. And one last thing for me, as I always finish with this one, expat partners are talented. So don't forget that you moved two talents and not only one when you when you send people in expatriation. Thank you.
Thank you very much.